2. Cat's Eyes. Vale awoke in a cold, sweating fever. The chanting from the streets was still pounding into his mind. The Pythia was gone with the fading nightmare, but the smell of wood smoke still clung to his dingy room. He ran his clammy hands over his face and through his red gold hair, vainly trying to shut out the rabble's thoughts. He needed the privacy of his own head, but the cheering for the returned hero mocked at Vale's failure and lost powers. Pushing his way onto the icy streets, he was jostled along on the tide of the celebrating throng. It was easier to drift with them. The icon banners, the drone of the piano Leica bands, like the voice of the relentless frost. Where he went did not matter, he had no future, that was plain. He was cast out, no longer appointed or anointed. So he wilfully immersed himself in the crowd's euphoric thoughts and was lost. Nobody. Rejoice, people of Gallifrey! Praise and honour great Pridonius and his mighty heroes! Easier said than done. Vale had forgotten his coat. He shivered either from the vicious cold or a fever. Suddenly famished, he found himself buying a greasy quickfish from a stall at the edge of the street. He knew he was just responding to junk thoughts, urges put in his head through cheap advertising, but he ate the gristly morsel anyway, even half enjoying its tacky blandness. It was finished in a few mouthfuls, and then he wanted more. It was either more junk thoughts, or they had impregnated the food with something that stimulated hunger. He bought another. The waves of excitement from the crowd were rising like heat, almost tangibly circling above the city like great wings. The snow-laden skies shuddered under their beats. Carried on the heady air and antagonized by it, Vale moved with the surging crowd. Underfoot, the slushy streets were littered with trampled pamphlets supporting Rassilon's opposition faction. Vale found that he was twisting his kerchief into a tight cord that burned his hands. His head began to swim as he was pushed on towards the parade route. The streets were heated, making him sweat all the more. A fresh spark of anger was beginning to smoulder in him, and his soul was dry as tinder. Cutting through the unified chanting of the mob, he heard his name called. Beside him, moving with the crowd, was Loey. "Vale Voriansti, you should have answered the door." Vale might have thought, "Fall off!" loud enough for her to hear through the chanting, but he couldn't ignore the imploring brown eyes. "Why should I?" he snapped. She took hold of his arm. "You'll freeze out here without a coat. Look, I heard the tutor this morning. You got the highest exam quota ever in temporal manifold physics." "So?" He snatched his arm away, but as he turned to leave her, the crowd erupted and the first dancers in the victory procession rounded the top of the street. Their voluminous skirts billowed out round them like scarlet sails as they whirled their way along the route. "You think that they'll drop you? Is that it? Why shouldn't they? I failed every other assessment." "But they can't afford to waste you, Vale." "How wasteful," he heard the Pythia say again. The spinning dancers were passing, and behind them trundled a great decorated bier, drawn by a plumed leviathan. The lumbering creature, its 3 tusks encrusted with silver, swung its massive head in time with the chanting of the crowd. On the bier, the returned crew of the Apolitan flung showers of gold coins to the crowd. Standing amid the piled tributes of fealty to the Gallifreyan Empire, they waved their ceremonial swords in triumphant acknowledgement. Loey took Vale's arm tightly. "You're too valuable to them. They need temporal physicists for the timescape experiments." The chanting of the crowd was cutting into his feverish thoughts. He wrung the kerchief through his hands. "Why do you care? Leave me alone. I'm nobody. I don't want to be anyone." He turned away from her and stared up at the bier. High above the crowd, Pridonius lifted a glass case in a victory salute. Inside, the gnarled, feline, feminine head of the Sphinx stared out over the throng. Its amber eye glittered and met Vale's stare. "Who are you?" was its riddle. "You're an idiot!" shouted Loie in disgust at him. "Be nothing then, and you'll stay that way." He cried out in hatred, his anger kindled, and rounded on her. Amid the riotous joy of the crowd, Loie screamed and fell back, her hair smoking and face blistering under the force of another's spite. Vale turned and forced a way through the mob. He ran, angry and afraid of the power he had unleashed from inside himself. Now he was nothing, he had no future, but that was what he wanted. The future could do without him. He could hide forever in his own mind. No one would know because no one had seen. The uncontrolled euphoria of the crowd was changing the colour of the sky overhead. Patterns of light shifted among the heavy clouds like an aurora. It started to snow. The city seemed to spin. Council police were moving onto the streets to deal with a number of fights that had broken out, and one reported case of spontaneous combustion. Vale reached his room and flung himself onto the pallet, burying his feverish head under the pillow. Shut it all out, as long as no one had seen. Again, the stars spun and the dark blue oblong tumbled towards him, its beacon flashing, its engines grating. But he denied it. It was not his future. He was safe from it. And then he saw the eye again, ancient and terrible, as the Sphinx had always been to those forced to worship it. The eye glittered and pierced him with its next riddle. Did I see? Of course it had seen. Why else should it ask? He had been wrong. There was no escape from the future, and as the future came closer, he saw it clearer too. Again the blue box, a TARDIS, whatever that was, tumbled. Again he was held. They were all held by the malignant eye, the eye of the Sphinx, the eye of the Pythia. The flow of people and time on Ealing Broadway had settled into a smooth drift that was slower than was natural, but it intensified Ace's vision too. She was aware of matter shifting under the force of time's currents, little swirls of microscopic particles that eddied away from so-called solid or animate objects, much as mud slowly shifts in the flow of a river. Ace could have stopped to watch the diaphanous colours of the molecules around her forever. The structure of the whole street, the buildings and the pavements, was seethingly alive, and the people moving through it were participants in a slow, graceful dance. But time's currents, unlike a river, flow in many directions at once. At its centre, Ace was untouched. She found that she could move quickly between the slow-motion people she encountered. The sky still flared repeatedly with the beacon light, but the Doctor was nowhere to be seen. He must have moved fast, but it was easy to guess where he was going. Ace had only to retrace their journey from Perivale and head towards the source of the beacon. It was obvious what that was too. The TARDIS was somehow warning of impending crisis. The effects of it were already all around them, although the local inhabitants seemed oblivious of the fact. But then what did you expect of Perivale? Ace knew it had been a mistake to come back. She had grown up here, but the place made her uneasy with its memories. The TARDIS was her home now, like its owner, a source of endless excitement and change, and she didn't want to lose it. She could hear a distant noise, maybe even miles away, like something scrabbling against a hard surface, and then a splintering sound, followed by more scrabbling. Around her, the surge of dimensional currents intensified. She could sense it outside and in, like a tingle of electricity in her nerves. In her haste to catch up with the Doctor, she was already running faster than the slow-motion traffic on the main road, but she was still going to be too late. Then she stopped short. A figure was moving slowly along the pavement towards her, emerging through the drifting molecular haze. A shortish woman, wearing a striped t-shirt and red trousers that would have looked better on someone 10 years younger. Her hair was bunched up over her head and held by a mauve scarf. She was wearing too much makeup, as usual. Ace didn't know whether to stay or hide. She turned her back and waited, trying to catch her breath, half hoping that the figure would vanish or turn away. But despite the slow motion, the woman soon reached her. Ace's throat had dried, but she forced herself to turn, look straight at the figure and say, "Mum?" Her mother moved slowly past, as if she hadn't even noticed Ace. Her every slowed movement deliberately emphasised its detail, like a ghostly ballet. She looked a bit older, but she was even still wearing Ace's dad's wedding ring. Her bag swung slowly back and forth from her shoulder with her arms, achieving a grace she had never had before. Ace hadn't seen her for 3 years. "Mum!" But the woman never stopped. "Why do you always look like that?" Ace yelled after her. "Soon forgot I disappeared, didn't you?" The apparition would soon be gone. Ace wanted to run after her, to pull her back and talk things over, but she didn't dare touch. "Mum!" Was Ace so much an outsider that they couldn't even see her now? The past was all raked up with plenty of places to go. She stared after it as it vanished on its dreamlike way. She and her mum were worlds apart already. Yet her mother was part of the existence that was disintegrating all around her. But the doctor needed her as well. The beacon was still flaring across the cloudless sky. As another car drifted slowly past, leaving a spiralling slipstream of coloured molecules behind it, Ace realised that the scrabbling noise had stopped. She started to run again. "Hang on, Doctor. Just wait, will you? Ace needs you too." A hairline crack slowly traced across the sky and then began to open, at first like crimson lightning, then like a wound. Ace rounded a corner and saw the familiar blue police box shape of the TARDIS ahead. As if in answer, the unnatural spread of time juddered back into a mode that she accepted as reality. As she walked along the sunlit avenue, she could see the light on the TARDIS's roof still flashing. The Doctor was kneeling on the pavement, apparently using his umbrella as a lever on one of the TARDIS's lower panels. In the houses around, Ace could see net curtains twitching. There was a sharp electrical crack. The umbrella flew backwards out of the Doctor's grasp and landed in the road. "Look at that!" he snapped as he saw Ace. He retrieved the umbrella and poked at a splintered hole in a panel at the base of the TARDIS. Halfway up the side of the police box there was a scorch mark with an elegant swirled pattern burned into the paintwork. "This must be the impact point," he said, and ran the tip of his umbrella down a blistered line which led straight to the splintered hole. "Hang on," said Ace. "I thought you were ill." The Doctor just looked irritated. "Professor, I thought there was some mega disaster going on. Back there, the whole of time and space was going crazy." "You noticed it too, then. Good." "What?" The Doctor flailed his hands in exasperation. "It's all muddled," he complained. "How can I find a rational answer if I can't even think of a question?" Ace crouched down and squinted through the hole in the TARDIS. "Is something still in there?" she asked. "How long did you say you'd been travelling with me in the TARDIS?" "I don't know. Long enough." "Yes, exactly what I thought." That unnerved her. "What do you mean, long enough?" "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with you." "Long enough to understand," he snapped, and began to walk slowly round the outside of his ship, tapping at its sides with his umbrella like a blind man. Ace followed and complained as she went. "Is it the Silver Cat? Or was that just another collective hallucination? I thought you were ill, Professor. And what's the matter with the TARDIS? If it's under attack, I want to help." She stopped as a deep grating noise began to emanate from inside the police box. The Doctor winced and pressed his fingers to his head again. He sat down on the curb. "Something's got inside the ship," he said, his voice quavering. "The cat thing? Is that what was scrabbling?" He held up a hand to stop the questions while he tried to think. "I don't know what it is or how long it's been there. We may have picked it up in the vortex, but it's a threat. That's why we were summoned back." "Summoned by the TARDIS?" "Possibly." "Don't you know?" She sat down on the curb next to him. "Professor, just how long have you been travelling in the TARDIS?" "It's not an orthodox machine. It has little idiosyncrasies, especially when it's in trouble. Just like its owner." "Exactly." He looked directly at her. "Just like anyone who travels in it." The grating sound increased suddenly, and the sky began to pale from blue to orange again. Ace stood up. There was a nagging irritation in her mind, and she could guess the cause. "It's in dead lumber, isn't it? Real trouble. Sticking ideas in our heads to bring us home." Something in his ship. Something coiling and squirming its way deeper. The Doctor felt its violation of its home as surely as if it was in his own head. He felt a cold ache and shivered in the warm sunshine. How could he cut the canker from his own mind? From somewhere nearby he heard the mocking jangle of an ice cream van. It played the Westminster chimes. "What's it doing in there?" whispered Ace. The doctor felt her hand on his shoulder. He took it and squeezed it fondly. "What can we do?" she said. "Smoke it out?" "Sooner said than done. There's another problem I hadn't anticipated." He cynically raised his hat to one of the twitching curtains across the road and then resumed his gloomy reverie. Ace wasn't so easily defeated. "Come on, Professor. At least let's get inside and find out what the damage is." He looked at her for a moment and then dug into his waistcoat pocket. "You do it," he said, and gave her the key. She walked up to the TARDIS and studied the panelled walls with increasing puzzlement. After she had walked round the police box twice, she gave up and went back to the doctor. "Professor," she said, "I can't find the door. It's disappeared." "That's what I was afraid of. But I had to be sure it wasn't just me." Ace helped him to his feet. He glanced up at the lurid sky, took a deep breath and advanced on the TARDIS. With a length of green garden string, he began hurriedly measuring off distances on the blue panels. It started to stop being an illusion, and soon it won't just be us who are affected. The gaps between the paving stones glimmered and began to widen. A police car rounded the top of the avenue and bore down on them. From inside the TARDIS came the sound of more frenzied scrabbling. The doctor clutched at the sides of his ship and moaned.